We've told you this before. The Republican plan for 2024 is to make it harder for you to vote and easier for them to cheat. Welcome back to Defending Democracy. I'm Marc Elias. Let's get started.
Republicans aren't interested in winning by earning votes. They want to win by boxing out people from the ballot box. Marc, we've seen it time and time again. We see it in the laws they pass, the lawsuits they file, the claims they make, the rules they talk about. Republicans just want to make it harder to vote and easier to cheat so that they can maintain and expand their power. I want to start by going through some of these examples and starting with probably one of the most nefarious ones, voter challenge.
Yeah, look, Paige, you and I have been talking about voter challenges for months and years. I mean, literally for years, we've been talking about this. And periodically we get questions that people email in or they put in the comments and they are very concerned about voter challenges. And I'm like, Paige and I have been talking about this for years. So look, this is a huge problem. The fact is that Republicans started really in the aftermath of 2020 this strategy of divvying up the voter rolls and finding voters who they want to kick off, right? This is their way of essentially purging voters through election vigilantism, right? This is private groups, sometimes nonprofits, sometimes the Republican Party itself, coming up with mass lists, spreadsheets of voters that they then submit to election officials and say these people should be kicked off the rolls. They shouldn't be allowed to vote. And it's no more complicated than that. We saw in 2021 in Georgia alone more than 350,000 voter challenges. My law firm and I went to court and we beat those back. Then Georgia passed a law to make it easier to challenge and harder to defeat challenges. When that didn't get them the results they wanted in 2022, where we saw 100,000 challenges, they've now come back with another law about making voter challenges easier. But Paige, we're also starting to see this spread, right? It is not just in Georgia anymore. We are seeing mass challenges now in Texas by one of the same groups, True the Vote, that was involved in these mass challenges that I described in Georgia, and they're now bringing their mass challenge strategy nationally, and Texas is a home state for True the Vote, so it's no surprise we're seeing it there.
We're also seeing Republican groups try to develop technology to make mass voter challenges like these easier. They have programs called like Eagle Eye that they claim will help facilitate mass voter challenges. They're also branding themselves as vigilantes. They want to talk about how if election officials won't, quote unquote, clean up the voter rolls, they'll do it themselves. And speaking of cleaning up voter rolls, one of the most classic ways that voters are disenfranchised are through voter purges. And we just saw a huge voter purge in the state of Ohio, led by Secretary of State Frank LaRose, when they cleared over 150 so-called inactive voters off their rolls.
Yeah, Frank LaRose is one of these Republicans that, a year or two ago, people would whisper you, not all Republicans are MAGA. Frank LaRose is a conservative, but he's not MAGA. Yeah, well, guess what? Frank LaRose is about as bad a MAGA vote suppressor as they come. I mean, let's just remind everyone, Paige, Frank LaRose is the same Secretary of State that tried to rig, and I say rig on purpose, rig the system to keep the pro-abortion ballot measure from passing. Remember this, Paige? First, they moved the date to try to move a date of an election so that people wouldn't know to vote, and maybe they'd win that way. They tried to raise the threshold for how many votes it had to get to pass. I mean, like all kinds of shenanigans there. Frank LaRose also involved in the redistricting effort where Republicans kept gerrymandering and having that struck down by their state Supreme Court, but kept gerrymandering. Now, most recently, he's involved in trying to come up with a misleading ballot initiative language involving an anti-gerrymandering ballot initiative. So that's who Frank LaRose is. And it is no surprise that in the very important state of Ohio, very important for the U.S. Senate, right? You have Sherrod Brown, a Democratic incumbent, running there. That Frank LaRose is knee deep in voter purges as well. But Paige, it's not just what we are seeing them do administratively, whether it's at the Secretary of State level or at the clerk county offices level, but it's also their lawsuits, right? I mean, they're bringing lawsuits suing to challenge the voter rolls. We've seen lawsuits in Nevada and Michigan and Pennsylvania and more. The Republican National Committee, you know, the committee run by Mike Whatley, who was put in place because Donald Trump wanted a more committed vote suppressor than Ronna McDaniel, believe it or not. Yeah, that person. Anyway, they sent a letter to 8 Democratic secretaries of state accusing them of allowing non-citizens to vote. Now, Paige, we know that's ridiculous. We know there is already a federal law against non-citizen voting, and this is just an effort by Republicans to inject further lies and misinformation into the system to explain to their voters why, when they lose in November, they lost.
Marc, Republicans are trying to do everything they can to sow doubt and chaos on the front end of elections by saying the voter rolls are inaccurate. But they're also trying to disrupt the endpoint of elections, which is election certification. We've heard a lot about that recently in states like Nevada and Georgia about conservatives and right-wing groups who are now targeting certification. What's their plan there?
Well, I mean, I think we know their plan, right? I mean, Donald Trump, in the middle of a political rally, gave a shout out to 3 of 5 members of the otherwise obscure, or previously obscure, Georgia State Elections Board. Right, this is a body that sets rules for how elections are held in the state of Georgia, and weren't we all surprised when he gave a shout out to 3 of those 5 members as pit bulls who were committed for his victory? And what are they doing? They are passing rules in Georgia to make the certification process less certain, to allow election deniers in county offices to exercise discretion when certifying elections. This is like, Paige, like telling the scoreboard operator, you know what, we'll tell you when someone scores a touchdown, but you put up the points you think are right. If you think it wasn't a touchdown, maybe you don't put up 7 points, maybe you put up 6 points, maybe you put up 2 points, right? If you don't think the extra point was good, even though the referee says it was, or maybe you get points to the other side, right? This is what they're doing with certification. And again, it's not just Georgia. These things start in one state or they get popularized in one state, but then you see it in state after state. In 2022, remember, Paige, Democracy Docket did a lot of coverage of Cochise County, Arizona. Now, Cochise County, Arizona doesn't sound as exciting as the state of Georgia, but let me tell you something. The state of Arizona couldn't certify their 2022 election unless all of their counties provided accurate certified results. And Cochise County, a conservative-dominated, Republican-dominated rural county in Arizona, was refusing to do that. I'm proud that my law firm sued, and I'm even prouder that we won. And as a result, they were forced to certify. But Paige, this is what I think we have to just assume we are going to see in 2024. And it's going to take a lot of work from a lot of lawyers and campaigns and people who believe in democracy to keep these election deniers at bay.
Speaking of trends we saw in 2022 that we're concerned about again, voter intimidation was a big problem in 2022. In Arizona, we saw armed vigilantes monitor drop boxes. They claim that people were returning mail-in ballots illegally. Recently, Tennessee officials sent letters to over 14,000 voters demanding proof of citizenship. They claimed that they were non-citizens who were registered to vote. Advocacy groups there said that these letters amounted to nothing more than voter intimidation. And when we talk about Republicans helping voter intimidation, there are Republicans in the state of Arizona suing over state law that prohibits voter intimidation and harassment of election officials.
Yeah, just everyone needs to let that sink in. They are literally spending money to sue states to allow the intimidation of voters and the harassment of election officials, right? That is what the Republican Party and their conservative allies have come to, is that they take their money not to get people to turn out to vote, not to get people to register to vote, not to persuade people why their policies are better. No, they're taking the money that's donated to them and using it to challenge laws that are intended to protect election officials and voters from intimidation and harassment. And there is no reason why the Republican Party and its closely coordinating allies would be doing that unless they plan on intimidating voters and harassing election officials. And so we just need to realize, that there is an asymmetry to this process. I wrote a piece for Democracy Docket called "The Asymmetry of Election Denialism," and it is just the reality. Like while Democrat and progressive lawyers like myself and others are in court trying to expand voting rights, protect drop boxes, allow for people to register, those things, they're in court trying to allow their henchmen and vigilantes to intimidate voters and harass election officials. So that is the world in which we live, and it is incumbent on all of us, whether we are lawyers, whether we're in the media, whether we are activists, whether we are good neighbors, to not let it work. To not let it work. We need to stand up to these bullies. We need to make sure that everyone can vote. We need to make sure that election officials can do their job safely. And when that happens, it won't be because of anything the Republicans do. It'll be in spite of what the Republicans do. And, Paige, I mentioned before, Frank LaRose and Ohio. But one of the things that they are terrified about, that I think is leading to a lot of this, are these ballot measures, which have really just caught fire.
Yeah, Mark, across the country, we're seeing voters turn to ballot measures to institute the policies they want that their state lawmakers refuse to pass. We talked about Ohio and the redistricting reforms there. We're seeing it in state after state like Montana and Arizona and Florida when it comes to abortion access this fall. It is so exciting to see how many voters are turning to ballot measures to ensure that the democratic process is protected in their states. But in turn, we're seeing Republicans try to move the goalpost, try to say that, signatures weren't valid, to change the rules around ballot measures to keep voters from making their voice heard.
Yeah, and we've talked about this, and I mentioned before that because Republicans don't command a majority support, they have to change these rules of elections in order to continue to wield power. But there's probably nothing more pathetic and a more direct example of just how bankrupt they are as a party, just how unpopular their programs are, that they are now at the point that they have to rig the rules against ballot measures, right? I mean, like it has gotten to the point where it's not enough like candidate A versus candidate B. They literally are advancing policy positions that people are going out of their way to collect tens of thousands of signatures to qualify for a ballot, and then running a whole campaign to pass a law. Why? Because the Republican legislatures refuse to pass laws that their citizens overwhelmingly want, right? And so rather than like reflecting on that and being like, geez, Republican, colleagues, if I'm a Republican legislator, geez, colleagues, maybe we should change what we think about some of these policies, because it seems like what we think is really out of step with our constituents. They're like, nah, we'll just try to make it harder for them to pass a ballot measure. We'll just change the signature requirements. We'll come up with a misleading statement describing the ballot measure. I mean, it's just like they don't get the point, which is that what they are peddling people don't want, and their constant efforts to target voters, to target election officials, to target ballot measures is like they're just not understanding that is not going to save them in the end. In the end, it is because what they stand for has been so widely discredited and so firmly rejected that that's what they need to realize is the problem.
Mark, with all of this, the mass voter challenges, the voter purges, the attempts by Republicans to change the rules around ballot measures, what do you expect to see this fall from the GOP?
Look, Republicans are more desperate today than they were last week, and they were more desperate today than they were last month. I mean, the fact is that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz has put a real excitement into the Democratic Party. You see an expansion of the number of volunteers, the number of donors. You also see it showing up in the public polling numbers. So as Republicans come to realize that they are in real jeopardy of losing not just the presidency, but the House, and continuing to be in the minority in the Senate, they will become more desperate. They will not learn the lessons that you and I think that they should learn. It will only be after they have a thrashing at the ballot box that they will learn those lessons. So between now and November, I wish I could say that it's going to get better, but it's going to get worse. Republicans are going to be more desperate. Their supporters are going to be more angry. They're going to be more disillusioned. And I expect we will have a fall in which The Republican voter suppression war machine is going to be out in full force. The Republican election subversion vigilante organizations will be well funded and fully committed to overturning the results of free and fair elections. We saw this in 2020. We saw them try it again in 2022, and we all need to be prepared in 2024. But here's the good news. If everyone watching this video just takes a few simple steps, you make sure you're registered to vote. You double check that with the state. You have a plan to vote. You double check the rules in your county or state to make sure that your plan is still up to date. And then you tell all of your friends and families to do the same. If you all do that, we're going to be okay. The lawyers, the groups, the organizations, the voting rights advocates, the campaigns, they're all going to be out there protecting the right to vote and making sure that the will of the electorate is protected. But we need all of you to do your part. Make sure you're registered. Make sure you have a plan to vote. Make sure your friends and family do as well. And then vote Democratic from top to bottom. And if we all do that, I promise it'll be okay. Thanks for watching this episode of Defending Democracy. And please make sure you're subscribed to our free daily and weekly newsletters. We'll see you next time. Defending Democracy is a production of Democracy Docket LLC.